Chapter 3. Some Secular Prophets. An instance has been reported from England that illustrates in a single sequence several new and deeply significant trends in our relationships to the psychic world. A minister had undergone the shattering experience of losing a son and an only daughter within a very short time. Stunned by his double bereavement, he found all his religious education, all his ecclesiastical training, quite inadequate to restore the faith and morale necessary to carry on his day-to-day job. In the extremity of his despair, he consulted a medium. From the lips of the medium, he caught expressions so uniquely characteristic of his children as to convince him that they did indeed still live. Such cases have been common in my own work. Complacent churchgoers would be shocked if they knew how many American clergymen, in their heart of hearts, are agnostics or even atheists, mechanically repeating a learned formula they no longer believe. That I have been able, with Fletcher, to help so many of those who have come to me has been one of the great satisfactions of my life as a psychic. The clergyman under discussion some time later confided his experience to one of his parishioners, a widow. She told him the following story. I was young when I lost my husband and at first was nearly mad with grief. I was a silly little thing without much religion and almost no faith. I had the children to raise and no one to help me. When her minister came to call, he caught the full blast of her frustrated anger. I raged against God for taking my James from me, raged at the person for calling a God like that good. She'd have nothing to do with mediums. Didn't believe I should get comfort that way. So she continued to scold God for not meeting her needs, letting him have it with special fury whenever she wanted to show her husband how bonny the children were and how clever. At first she felt wicked, but after a while began to feel that God liked the honesty of it. Then one day her husband was there, but braver and stronger and happier than I had ever known him. Did she see anything? No, it was not a silly ghost, or hear anything. How could my ears hear what my eyes couldn't see? But thereafter he appeared often enough to be a full partner in raising their children. What had happened is obvious enough to the psychically experienced. The woman had brought into play her latent capacity for mediumship. Some projection here perhaps, the psychologist may suggest, but projection and mediumship, as we shall make clear in a later chapter, are not incompatible. What makes this case significant is that many people, ordinary people in ordinary occupations, are beginning to discover their psychic gifts. I encounter such cases so frequently as to be personally convinced that we are on the verge of so radical an overturn of materialistic values as to usher in an entirely new era of human experience. We are approaching a time when psychic ability will be found to be as common and as varied in quality as the ability to sing or play the piano or guitar or compose a poem or a picture. This awareness of an ultimate dimension of being may well be one of the great changes the 21st century will bring to man. The posture of the materialist is weakening. He is driven to more and more absurd explanations, to more and more obvious evasions, as the psychic evidence mounts. In ancient times, psychic gifts were exercised almost entirely under religious auspices. From a quite early date, however, these phenomena also appeared in circumstances in no way connected with religion. The most famous secular psychic of antiquity was, of course, the one who warned Julius Caesar to look out for the Ides of March. He was a professional. Even more impressive work has been turned in by amateurs of our own century. All the later work of the Irish poet W.B. Yeats was based on a remarkable sequence of psychic events that began on an October afternoon in 1917. Yeats and his bride of 4 days were idly passing the time of day when his wife, more or less as a lark, announced she was going to try automatic writing. The technique, generally known at the time, was simply to pass into a relaxed, receptive, drowsy mental state with a pencil and paper at hand. People endowed with this form of mediumship may begin to write unconsciously. What they write resembles in content the communications brought orally by mediums who work in trance. To their surprise, Ms. Yeats turned out to have an unusual powerful psychic endowment. What came was so exciting, sometimes so profound, wrote Yeats, that I persuaded her to give an hour or two a day to the unknown writer. So fascinating was the first week that he offered to give the rest of his life to piecing together the scattered messages. No, said the communications, They had come to give him a new imagery for his poetry. Then, over a period of years, they unfolded a vast scheme embracing the entire structure and meaning of history, interpreted as a complicated fabric of 2,000 year cycles. 3 years later, Yeats had 50 notebooks full of transcriptions. He reworked these and published the whole account in a 300-page book called A Vision. The transmission of the messages was punctuated at unexpected intervals by a wide variety of psychic displays. At one point, Mrs. Yeats suddenly broke off her automatic writing and began to communicate orally in trance. Over the years, there occurred such events as loud raps, flashes of light, musical sounds, strong scents of roses or violets, apparitions of persons attired in 16th and 17th century clothing, and once a single sentence spoken in a loud voice. One of the century's famous spirit communications, the Patient's Word series, came through another housewife and originated in the same spirit of play. Mrs. Pearl Curran of St. Louis had been given a Ouija board and occasionally spent an hour at it with a friend, seeing what they could get. For some time nothing came through but a mishmash of casual odds and ends that might easily have popped up from the subconscious of one of the people at the board. Then on a July evening in 1913, the planchette suddenly came to life. "Many moons ago I lived," it spelled out briskly. "Again I come. Patience Worth is my name." Thus began a relationship that continued for 2 decades, was continuously understudied by qualified experts, and became the subject of 2 widely read books. In point of sheer impact of personality, Patience Worth ranks with the most effective communicators ever to come through. She had wit, erudition, and literary talent. She had a sense of fun, a love of banter, a delight in conversation, and an affectionate disposition. Who she was, where she came from, and exactly where she lived remain mysteries. She found mischievous delight in keeping them so. When asked where she came from, she said, "Across the sea." Once when pressed, she revealed that she was a spinster and mentioned the date 1649 as somehow significant in her earth life. Thereafter, she calmly evaded questions about her origin. "I be like to the wind, and yea, like to it do blow me ever, since time. Do ye to tether me unto today I blow me then tomorrow? And do ye tether me unto tomorrow I blow me then today?" However, complete notes were kept from the beginning. Scholars went to work on her language and vocabulary, and clues were found. Her language, the items of apparel and household equipment to which she referred, were definitely English and definitely 17th century or earlier. Her speech was pure Anglo-Saxon Norman, containing almost no words of more recent origin and no references to modern vehicles, machines, utensils, or conveniences. She possessed a thorough knowledge of the flora and fauna of Renaissance England, and this she used to good effect in her poetry. Mrs. Curran, whose interests and education were musical, had no knowledge of any of these matters. Nothing delighted Patience more than to embroil a stuffed shirt in the toils of her wit, as in this exchange. "Doctor, I hope Patience Worth will come. I'd like to find out what her game is." Patience: "Dost then desire the plucking of another goose?" Doctor: "By George, she's right there with the geese, isn't she?" Patience: "Enough to baste the last upon the spit." Doctor: "She evidently thinks we're a conceited lot." "Well, I believe she'll agree you can't get far without a fair opinion of yourself." Patience: "How the donkey loveth his bray." Later, as Patience settled into her surroundings, she communicated numerous poems, some of them long and complicated, all of them competent, some having genuine literary merit. A few seem to have been composed on the spur of the moment. After transmitting this poem: "Ah, wake me not, for should my dreaming work a spout to soothe my troubled soul, wouldst thou deny me dreams? Ah, let me dream. The day may bring fresh sorrows, but the night will bring new dreams." Patience, seeing that its pathos had moved Mrs. Curran nearly to tears, quickly brought a smile with this little jingle: "Patter, patter, briny drops on my kerchief drying, spatter, spatter, salty stream down my poor cheeks flying. Brine enough to immerse a ham, salt enough to build a dam." Mediumships are broadly classified as mental cases, such as those discussed up to this point in this chapter, where the central event is the communication of a message, and physical, where events in the world of physical objects are produced by forces not acknowledged by modern materialistic science. One of the most unusual of the modern physical mediums, Daniel Douglas Home, was also the first to be so methodically studied by highly qualified scientists. Home was born in Edinburgh in 1833, brought to this country as a small child and raised in Connecticut. When he was 13, he announced that he could work with spirits. From that time on, he exercised a powerful mediumship of the physical variety. His work was widely witnessed and acclaimed. Home produced spirit writing of the kind that appeared on the wall, according to the biblical book of Daniel, at Belshazzar's feast. At Home's seances, furniture moved, even left the floor by itself. Ectoplasmic hands wrote messages. Home himself rose bodily into the air without visible assistance, all in the presence of expert investigators present for the sole purpose of detecting and exposing fraud. In Holmes' law mediumship, no one was ever able to cast a shadow on the genuineness of his phenomena. One of the observers was the celebrated British scientist Sir William Crookes, mentioned later in the chapter on scientists, who must be credited with, among other accomplishments, discovery of the element thallium and invention of the radiometer and the fluorescent vacuum tube. At one of Holmes' seances, Crookes seized one of the ectoplasmic hands. It gradually seemed to resolve itself into vapor, Crookes reported, and faded in that manner from my grasp. Another time, a hand, after hovering near me, took the pencil from my hand, rapidly wrote on a sheet of paper, threw the pencil down, then gradually faded. On 3 separate occasions, Crookes wrote, I saw Holmes rise completely from the floor. Each time I had full opportunity of watching. Holmes was always jealous of what he called his amateur standing. Though grateful persons showered him with gifts, he never performed for pay. Another inspired amateur in the physical field did his work during the 40-year period 1910 to 1950 and was repeatedly observed and extensively reported by the world traveler, author, and YMCA Asia secretary Sherwood Eddy. His name was E.A. Macbeth. His home was in Rhinebeck, NY, and he maintained an apartment in New York City, where many of his seances were conducted. A man of independent means, he took no pay for his very extensive mediumistic work. He had been a practicing physician, had retired from medicine, and gave his time to business affairs and to his mediumship. Dr. Macbeth produced some of the clearest, most sustained, and best witnessed direct voice messages ever reported. Direct voice is a technique in which, by means to be discussed in a later chapter, the voices of discarnate visitors are heard directly, that is, as coming out of the air, without utilizing the medium's vocal apparatus. He was adept in psychometry or object reading, in which the medium holds a piece of personal property in his hand and receives and relates sometimes very extensive information about the person who possessed it. He was one of the rare mediums who could demonstrate independent writing distinguished from automatic writing by the circumstance that no earthside human touched his pencil or paper. Macbeth possessed precognitive powers and, perhaps not surprising in a physician, was frequently able to effect spiritual healing. Many times and in the presence of numerous observers, he produced the rare apport, the dematerialization of a distant object and its rematerialization out of the air in the seance room. Objects such as china or metal ornaments, ashtrays, metal discs, taken from the homes of visitors who had come from a distance, were transported in this way. Hardly less remarkable than Macbeth himself was his control, Father Tobe. Tobe was, according to his own account, a doctor of philosophy from Ireland who came to the United States and died in Elizabethtown, Kentucky, in 1852. Deeply religious and immensely learned, he spotted Macbeth's psychic talent, discovered a strong personal compatibility with him, and made the doctor his instrument during the long and productive mediumship. If, as is certainly the case, people sometimes complain that spirit messages tell too little about life in other dimensions, Tobe was a notable exception. He discoursed learnedly on the subject for hours. His fascinating views are taken up in their proper place in another chapter. He had this to say about foretelling the future. We are in eternity, not time, nor are we subject to time and its subjective conditions as you are, although our life here is dependent and has its limitations. This transcendence of time over here may help you realize in part how persons in dreams or by clairvoyance or otherwise are able at times accurately to foresee the future by precognition, a very frequent psychic phenomenon. No account of distinguished mediums would be complete without mention of Edgar Cayce, whose unique career began just after the turn of the century and ended with Cayce's death in 1945, and Eileen J. Garrett, who contributed an outstanding and widely studied mediumship. Edgar Cayce was born on a western Kentucky farm in 1887 and had vivid psychic experiences, including occasional visions from early childhood. He was intensely religious and soon gained a thorough knowledge of the Bible. In school, however, he was slow. One time when he was 12, his exasperated father drove him from early evening to nearly 11 at night to learn a spelling lesson he simply could not master. Finally, exhausted, the boy asked for a 5-minute break to sleep on the book. It was granted. When he awakened, he knew every word on every page of the spelling book, letter perfect. Despite his astounding ability to master books by simply sleeping on them, Edgar never developed a love of learning. He quit school at 15, got a copy of a wholesale stationery catalog, slept on it, and got a job with the firm by demonstrating he knew their catalog by heart. He later earned his living as a photographer, never had much interest in money and so never had much of it. When Cayce was 21, he was attacked by a mysterious illness that caused him excruciating headaches and loss of voice. A New York doctor treated him by hypnosis and suggested, when he discovered his patient's psychic talent, that Cayce might benefit from hypnotizing himself. This Edgar did. His words while in hypnotic sleep were recorded. They constituted the first of the more than 15,000 diagnostic readings he did over a period of some 40 years. These in part were his words on this first occasion. Yes, we can see the body. In the normal physical state, this body is unable to speak due to a painful paralysis of the inferior muscles of the vocal cord, produced by nerve strain. This is a psychological condition producing a physical effect. It may be removed by increasing the circulation to the affected parts by suggestion while in this unconscious condition. Note the medical manner of speaking from the lips of a young man who had never cracked a medical book. In a few minutes he said, "It's all right," and awoke, and it was. Soon after that, the devout Cayce prayed that his psychic gifts might be used for healing, and especially for healing children. Almost at once there was brought to him by a local doctor a little girl who was having 20 convulsions a day and seemed in danger of losing her reason. Cayce hypnotized himself and while asleep, dictated instructions which the doctor followed. In 3 months, reads a statement notarized and dated 1910, she was in perfect health and is so to this day. The story of Cayce's thousands of successful diagnoses while in trance has been told many times, most notably by Thomas Segru in his famous book, There is a River. Physical researchers are still studying the cases on file at the Association for Research and Enlightenment Cayce Foundation at Virginia Beach, Virginia. Besides his medical work, Cayce left a prophecy called Earth Changes for the remaining years of the 20th century. Strife between labor and management, a division in our land, outbreaks of mob violence were all predicted by Cayce before he died in 1945. There will be strife among other places in the areas above Australia, Indonesia, Vietnam. Great land changes may be expected before 1998, with parts of coastal United States slipping into the sea. Great Lakes waters flowing into the Gulf of Mexico, portions of the lost Atlantis rising up again from the ocean. Vast new temple records from antiquity will be discovered in Egypt, prophecy fulfilled in 1964. New land will arise around Bimini. Yes, for there will be a breaking up until the time when there are people in every land who will say that this or that shows the hand of divine interference, or that nature is taking a hand. Let each declare whom ye will serve, a nation, a man, a state, or thy God. End of chapter 3.